Welcome everyone to Startup Grind's Founder Series, where we educate our community on highly relevant early stage topics through interviews with founders of our top startups. Today's subject is designing a fundraise, lessons from Flatfile's first two investment rounds. I'm very excited to welcome Eric today, and the goal of today's episode is to educate other founders in our community on strategies to make their capital raise as efficient as possible, obviously so that they can get back to doing what they love, which is building. So just kicking off with some introductions. My name, before I go to Eric, my name is Alex, and I'm the VP of Sales and Startups here at Startup Grind. If you don't know us, we are the world's largest community of startups, educating, inspiring, connecting founders from across 120 plus countries. We run 3,000 events per year, including the largest tech conference in Silicon Valley, and have a startup program that currently supports hundreds of the best startups from our community using tailored education, network introductions, and global exposure. In our first episode, I interviewed Seek VR founder Mary Spio. Flatfile is another one of our most exciting startups in our program, so let's kick off. Eric, you are the co-founder and COO of Flatfile. You've spent more than a decade in B2B software at both enterprises and startups, contributing in roles ranging from product and engineering to marketing, customer success. And you're joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Alex?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm getting this. We were talking about Zoom fatigue before we kicked off. I mean, it's the end of the week, so I'm probably as tired as I will be. But you know, hopefully the recording will go smoothly in spite of that.
I like to wear my pineapple shirt on Friday, given that I can't really go out to the beach these days.
That's a good shout. I like that. I've got my athletic gear on at the moment because I'm going to go for a run and clear my head. So, you know, different strategies. So let's dive in. I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit more about Flatfile just to get some context on the episode. Do you want to start by maybe just telling us what is Flatfile and what is the problem that you guys are solving?
Yeah, for sure. So what we solve is what we call data onboarding. So if you've ever had to onboard a new customer, not only do you have to train the customer on how to use your software the best, but you also have to train their data on how best to fit into your software system. And so this is typically a challenge that's tough to solve because your customer has all the right data, but it might not be labeled the right way. It might not be formatted the right way. And so most businesses, especially in the software space, when you need to collect data as a very early touch point with a customer, is a crucial opportunity to show value of your solution. And Flatfile is a bridge between what your customer is coming in with and what you view as the ideal usable structure of data within your platform or application.
Amazing. I love that. And did it come from personal experience through those 10 years? Is that something that you and David, your co-founder, had experienced and built off of?
Yeah, I think we just got tired of having to solve this problem over and over again at every single business we were at. And I think the last straw was when we were working together at Envoy. Yeah, we were building workplace management solutions. We had no designs to start a data company, but we were frustrated that there wasn't a drop-in data importer that we could use in the application to solve some of the challenges we were running into when it came to onboarding these new customers' data.
Yeah, I mean, that's the ideal story, right? You know, you're solving, you are your own customer. So you know exactly where to start. So love that. And so this is obviously a common question, but why do you feel like now is the best time for Flatfile to be solving that problem?
Yeah, so we'll touch on this a little bit later as well, but one of the most kind of surprising points that was made during our initial fundraising round was something that we weren't even quite aware of, was the fact that 87% of enterprise data, it lives outside of a database or is not connected to an API. So if you think about the world that we typically live in as startups, you think, oh, well, we've got all these API-based connectors and real-time event tracking, but most enterprises don't live in that world. They have one-off access databases, Excel spreadsheets passed everywhere, fixed width mainframes that they might be dealing with. And because there is this just explosion of the verticalization of legacy SaaS segments. So whether it be in service operations, you see companies like Service Titan, or even one that got started a little bit earlier in the CRM space. You're starting to see much more specialization in what software can do and what these SaaS businesses can do. But one of the biggest challenges for them going to market is actually getting access to all of that data that lives in all of these legacy systems or processes. And so that sort of combined with the fact that today it's as easy as it ever was just to bake in machine learning, not as your solution, but as a part of a broader solution to a challenge that a human needs to solve, meant that it was the right time to start Flatfile.
Okay, love that. And in terms of you were founded in early 2018, was it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so getting into the sort of the fundraising kind of category of questions, I'd love to know, I think between your founding or your foundation and your first sort of pre-seed raise was around a year or just over a year. So could you sort of dive in before we go into how you funded it using, venture capital and so on? How did you sort of fund those early days? What sort of techniques or tools did you use?
Yeah, so the most expensive, and I hate using this term to refer to humans, but the most expensive resource, I guess, for any startup is the time of intelligent, well-versed and capable people. And for us, that meant, okay, if we're starting this business, you can spin something up on Amazon pretty cheap or Heroku. That wasn't really the issue. The issue was, how do we get folks to contribute to this to help us define a solution within this problem space? And I got to give all the credit to my co-founder, David, for coming up with this. But basically what he did was he said, well, let's look at a safe note. Like, what is a safe note actually, right? It is just dollars for some future equity stake in the business, or dollars back at some sort of discounted rate, right? And so instead of giving out safe notes to investors, we said, hey, can you invest your time in helping us define our business, and we'll give you a safe note in the business. So actually most of our earliest contributors to Flatfile, myself included, were actually working on safe notes in order to, basically fund the business with those people's time and efforts. And then from there, prove out whether or not there was a market opportunity that we should pursue as a full-time funded startup.
That's super interesting. So did you guys come up with that idea, or did David come up with that idea himself, or was that based on discussions with, colleagues or people from his network?
Yeah, so we were basically talking about how best to do this. And I think David was the one who just came up with the idea, because one of his approaches that he likes to use is a base principles approach, right? So let's get to the core of the problem, right? Okay, we don't have money. So if we don't have money, we need to go get investment dollars. But do you need to get investment dollars? Because what do those investment dollars buy you? And usually at the very earliest stage of a business, it's buying you the time of experts who can come in and help move that business forward, whether it's yourself or whether it's others. And so basically you said, hey, if that's what we need, then let's just take this vehicle, which is normally used to get that capital, and just go right to the source, which is the time of those people who could help contribute to our business.
That's really cool. So, and what were the sort of the legal intricacies of putting that together, where it's saying, you're trading your time for this note or this safe? How did the piecing together of that work?
Oh man, well, I thought this was supposed to be a 20, 30 minute long podcast here. No, it's
a short one.
I will say the lawyers weren't particularly happy with it, but they also couldn't really call out anything that was expressly wrong with it. I think if we go back, we'd probably tweak a few little things in those documents to make them slightly non-standard safe notes, because it did give us some problems right when we were trying to close with timing considerations. But other than that, it actually worked out fairly well.
That's super interesting, and I maybe we'll have to do a whole separate podcast just focusing on that particular thing, and I'm sure we'll get some interesting questions about it afterwards. So moving into your pre-seed raise, I think it was pretty big, right? It was at 2.1 million just a year after founding. What were the main reasons for raising so much so early?
Yeah, so we are both product people. And so we took a very product oriented approach to this. And so the start of the business was really like, okay, is there a sustainable business behind this? Or is this just a lifestyle business that we run as a side project, right? So that was the first question to answer. And by the beginning of 2019, we felt we'd answered that. And that kind of leads into part of the reason why we knew this was a venture backable business was that we had at that point like 20, 25 paying customers. But across those customers, they were in about 12 different segments and use cases. And for us, that was an indication that this is a very, very broad market opportunity. And further on top of that, we ran these various test launches and campaigns, all of which again relied mostly on human effort and not necessarily dollars. But what it led us to were conversations with Fortune 500 companies. And we're thinking, okay, we've got this lifestyle business or, feature or something that looks like, just like a little side project. And we're already having conversations with the type of businesses that you would dream of at Series C. And so we said, okay, there's got to be a reason why there's this much interest in what we're solving. And so we took it upon ourselves to do a lot of deep research. That's where that 87% figure comes from, is just understanding that like there is a much larger market opportunity here than just a simple feature that goes into a SaaS application. And armed with that knowledge, we said, okay, we should probably raise money to capitalize this business a little bit because we want to maximize the market potential here rather than maximize our path to profitability, which might sound a little bit odd, especially since I'm in Atlanta, which is sort of the hub for bootstrapped, profitable early startups. But we knew that by being profitable early meant focusing on a very specific type of use case and would also cut out the maximum market potential for our business later on in the future.
That's really, really interesting. And what I was going to ask was, how did you come up with the figure of 2.1 when you were so early in your business? What sort of mechanism did you use?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. I mean, the first was signaling mechanisms. Like our goal was to raise somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million. And so we knew that, that would be a nice signaling effect. The other was that we already had all these contributors on the team and we wanted to bring on most of them full time. And so we said, okay, if we want to bring on these contributors to the team and fill out a couple other gaps that we know we'll need to fill in the next year, what would that look like? And so that's why we ended up raising what we did. And we talk about this a lot internally, but one thing we try to be is constantly aligned on 100% buy-in, which means that we're not afraid of selling part of the company to someone else. Like we know that if we continue to operate the business the way that we have and continue to realize more and more of this massive market opportunity that's in front of us, it doesn't matter if you own 7% or 8% of an IPO'd startup, you're going to be fine, right? From a financial perspective. And so we said, okay, we're not going to get nitpicky about exact percentages, but we are going to want to make sure that we control the vision and the future of the business. And so we said, we're willing to trade more dollars for things like board control and provisions that would typically come in an investment round that could hamper our ability to really, go after the whole market opportunity, as opposed to get pressure from investors to start turning a profit on a quarterly basis or operating basis too early.
Great, and let's sort of dig into the actual fundraising process now. So starting from knowing that you needed to raise to actually closing that pre-seed round, what was the timeline of that?
Yeah, so it took about 3 months through that entire process. Just like, okay, hey, we know we need to go raise money to money's in the bank. Let's, go give all of our contributors full-time offers and get off to the races here. But the process in particular really kicked off with us realizing, hey, okay, we need to go get money for the business. And then there were a couple of different routes we could have gone. We could have said, hey, we'll go to like a Y Combinator or 500 startups and go through that as sort of a program, or we can go to angels and just, pull in, this is a derogatory term, but one that people understand, which is dumb money, right? Like we could just pull in cash to the business, or we could go the institutional route. And we chose the institutional route because we knew we needed to learn a lot more about different parts of the market that existed for us. And we knew that bringing in not just one, but multiple institutional investors would help us get access to different geographies, different types of businesses or customers that could potentially use us, and then also give us different perspectives on our path to market here. Just because I wouldn't say there's any right answer, but there's plenty of wrong answers about how to address a broad market as opposed to a narrow market.
And I believe you told me a sort of small anecdote beforehand, which is that Gaurav from A4 Capital actually went to school with your wife. So either that's serendipity or it's good networking. I'm not sure. But is that the best place to start?
Yeah, so it was interesting. Gaurav wasn't the first person I messaged, actually. So we had a very intentional process here, which was that neither of us had gone through the process of raising venture capital before, right? So we didn't know what it was like to put together a pitch deck. We hadn't experienced getting in a room in front of partners and sharing information about our business with them and what they would care about or how to answer questions. And so we actually did a lot of planning in this. And again, this is the product in us coming out, which is like, okay, what is our minimum viable product? And it was like the most basic pitch deck. It was value propositions. And then it was like, okay, who are our beta customers going to be? And so it was going to be friendly investors that we knew probably weren't the best fit for us, but as a result would give us great feedback. You know, when you're talking to an investor and they're kind of on the fence, they're not sure about you, they're not going to give you the best possible feedback. But if they know that they're not a good fit for you, they'll tell you everything that they want. So, I mean, we were going to traditional like Series A and Series B type firms where we had personal connections, asking if we could pitch them. And they said, hey, you know what? This is not our sweet spot for business right now, but let me give you some feedback on this. So that helped us rapidly iterate on our pitch, our messaging, and our positioning, so that when we got to the point where we said, okay, we feel like we've got this really well down, let's go ahead and turn that into a formal fundraise. So that first part of the process actually took about 6 weeks of just meeting with investors, iterating. And in the meantime, in the background, what we were doing was we were doing a few little things that were going to increase the velocity of the round when we said, okay, we found our set of institutionals, we're really going to go after them.
I love that, the productization of the pre-seed fundraise. That's great. And so how many iterations do you feel like you went through during that 6-week period?
Oh man, probably 40 iterations at least over the 6 weeks, sometimes multiple times in a day. And what really helped was that David and I spent a lot of time just practicing with each other over and over again. We would practice, for example, questions. So, hey, if this type of question comes up, Eric's going to answer it. If this type of question comes up, David's going to answer it. And what that helped do was give the impression when we were actually pitching that we were just on the same page, right? It's like, okay, hey, these folks know exactly what they're doing. They're not having to prompt each other. They just know exactly who owns what in the business. And that gives me a lot of confidence in this founding team that they're capable of taking this from this early, pre-seed investment to a sustainable, durable business in the long run.
That's an interesting one, actually. Do you think that, obviously, you'd hope that in person that kind of collaboration came off as organic, but do you think is it ever organic? Does it have to be really, in this kind of sort of instance, does it have to be almost manufactured and practiced on that level for it to work really well?
Well, people say like Steph Curry is the best natural shooter in the world, right? How much has he practiced? How many times has he shot a three-pointer in practice over and over and over again? How many times has he practiced with his teammates on different plays to make it look and feel natural? So I would say that it probably didn't come across manufactured because we practiced so much in preparation for the actual sort of main event, which was getting into that conversation and having it. The other thing too is just that I think a lot of times startup founders get overly focused on their pitch deck. Make the pitch deck good, but don't overthink your deck, right? People are going to look at you. They're going to look at you in the face. And I will say that yes, we were able to farm out pitch decks and like design it fairly well. You know, David's got a little bit of a design background, so he's able to make it look fairly nice with some, you know, iconography, colors, fonts. But ultimately, the best conversations we had were with people who were looking us in the face instead of staring up at a screen.
Yeah, that's definitely understandable. And so when it comes to actually choosing the investors, you said you eventually got to a sort of short list of institutionals that you really wanted to go after. How did you approach that process, this sort of secondary process, and how did you end up choosing the investors that you ended up going with?
Yeah, so for the second part of the process, that was when, okay, we knew what our pitch was. We had practiced it really well. We'd gotten a lot of great feedback from folks who we're still, you know, close with and engaged with even today, which is part of the benefit of kind of going, you know, punching above weight class early on gets you access to certain folks who will still be following along and interested in your business. And so we said, okay, we've got everything that we need here. Now let's go ahead and actually run this fundraising process. And so a couple things that we did that were pretty crucial early on. First, I can't overstate the value of the forward email. So being able to write an email that's succinct, that describes your business, and also why you think an investor might be interested in speaking with you. You're giving them a lot of good information about where you are. And you're also telling them like, hey, you might be interested in this because I'm actually paying attention to what you're saying and thinking. And so that's how we got introduced to quite a few of the folks that we ended up getting into, you know, serious discussions with about funding the business. The other thing that we did, so that was kind of external facing, was like the forward email and making sure that like our initial approach to these investors took an approach that was very personal and meant that we knew what they were thinking about. But the internal approach was, we had almost a scientific type of formula that we were using based on what we were looking for in those investors. So as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to find folks who got us access to different types of markets, different types of geographies, and also different types and scales of businesses. And so we had this weighted average formula that was based on things like the geography. Are these in different geographies from us? Are these investors, you know, do they have like an established brand that could help connect us to some larger businesses early on? And then also our feeling for how engaged they were with us as a business, even early on. Especially when you're at the very early stage, there might be this temptation to say, oh, well, I'm going to go after all of the, you know, brand name VCs of the world. Looking back at it, the ones who have done the most for us are the ones who got down in the trenches with us and said, hey, we're going to figure out this business with you. We're going to meet with you regularly. We're going to be proactive. And so that was actually a little checkbox that we had, was like, has this investor been proactive with us through this process? I.e., they didn't wait for us to reach out. They instead reached out separately with their thoughts or ideas about where the business could go. That was a really strong early indicator for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's aligned with, so our founder, Derek, who's got another company, Bevy, just raised a Series B. He said that a good approach for him was targeting investors who had something to prove in their career, because they're more likely to actually follow through on their investment with actual, you know, strategic support and a lot of help, because they really want to make a name for themselves. So I like that you sort of used a similar metric when you were thinking about who to go with.
Yeah, and I'll plug Gaurav here as well, right? I mean, we weren't certain about Gaurav. You know, a couple of years ago was, you know, just getting into their, I think, second fund, and they weren't incredibly well known. But what we saw in Gaurav and Anamishra was that they were just hustlers, right? Like they were putting their effort into the business like we were as startup founders. And so we said, okay, not only can they help us with all this insight and connections and capital, but they can also just empathize with what we're going through. And so that did make a big difference at that early stage. And like I said, the investors that we've had sort of the best results with have always been the ones who have been thinking about our business, even when sometimes we're not.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to have those kind of partners on board. So great that you did. So, and we'll come on to the seed in a minute, because I think that was, you know, almost an even more interesting story with the speed that it happened at. But just to kind of, you know, bridge the gap between pre-seed and seed, how did you sort of allocate that pre-seed money, and what sort of length of runway did you have?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that we wanted to do with that money was to prove out that there was some sort of product market fit here and prove out the breadth of that market, right? Like we had all this industry statistics and we had this, leading indication that, there was a pretty good market here, but we wanted to be able to prove that out. And so what we took that money to do was dedicate it towards two specific things. The first was product development. All right, let's iterate towards a version of this product that we feel like does address these pains across all these different segments that we are seeing as potential customers. And the second was the go-to-market. Like, are we capable of taking this solution and serving the market with it? And so those were things that led up to our, Series Seed fundraising, which came a few months later. And I will say that, when we raise, typically you want to raise and get 18 to 24 months of runway. I think once we realized that those two things were checked off from the product market fit perspective and from the go-to-market perspective, and that happened pretty early on in this year, we said, to hell with runways, right? Like, we know that we've got a business here that is not only fundable, but is something that could eventually turn a profit, even if we weren't able to get fundraising. And so with those two things in mind, we were able to pretty easily set ourselves up for a seed fundraise, or regardless of the runway that did exist in the business.
Interesting. And how did that change what you were tracking between pre-seed and seed? And obviously, if you're raising a seed round a lot earlier than you had previously thought you would, you're having to recalibrate what you're, just how you're tracking what your KPIs are. So how did that work?
Yeah, it all happened so quickly, but basically what we were originally looking at was like adoption and average revenue per customer, right? So like adoption was like, okay, are we getting the types of businesses that we think this is useful for to adopt and use our solution? So early on, we had some great like high growth startups come in right after that pre-seed. So folks like Toast and Jobber. And then there were some later stage larger businesses, like a little bit closer to the end of last year, like Benevity, who came in and said, hey, this is actually something that's really interesting to us as well, that were kind of helping us prove those points on the adoption side. And then on the average revenue per customer side, we wanted to say like, hey, but you can solve a problem all day long, but that problem also has to be worth something to someone, and you have to be able to sell it as a business. So are we able to continue to push up almost month over month, double digits average revenue per customer? And if we were able to successfully do that, we said, okay, we know our market size is big and growing, and we know that we're able to capture more and more revenue over time from customers, the better we're able to serve a solution to this problem of data onboarding. So with those two pieces of evidence, around like middle of January this year, we pulled a couple levers on the revenue side of the business, and that's what basically launched almost like a self-driving fundraising round in our seed round.
Wow. So the actual preparation for your seed, you almost didn't have time to prepare because it came around so fast that, you realized again, this is the time to kind of double down early.
Yeah, I mean, I think you sent me over the questions before this conversation, just some examples. And one of them was like, what was it like putting together, structuring your deck for the seed round? We didn't actually. I mean, we put together a deck, but the deck was a diligence deck. So as investors were basically handing us preemptive term sheets, they still do their diligence, right? And so we said, okay, it's not efficient for us to get on, 2-hour-long phone call and build out a set of docs for every single one of these folks. So let's just put together a deck that has all the information that they need to know to validate what they're thinking about the investability of this business.
So do you think to what extent would you say that the amount of effort you put into basically productizing your pre-seed raise led to eventually your seed raise happening like it did?
Oh, 100%. And I think that's kind of the key here, is that because of the way that we focused on operating the business and proving out those couple points that I mentioned before, paired with the way that we ran our pre-seed process, which got us exposure to a lot of different investors, but didn't necessarily put them on the spot in terms of us asking for a term sheet. What that helped us do was essentially turn our pre-seed or a seed round into an extension of all the effort we put into the pre-seed. So it was in short enough time frame that folks still knew about Flatfile and knew we were, a potentially investable business. And then we were able to just lean on those connections that we'd started developing in the first round to say, hey, by the way, it looks like we're going to raise some additional capital here based on the sort of evidence that we're seeing in the business today.
And do you feel like the initial feedback that you got from those A, B, C investors, reverse engineering that helped you be much clearer on exactly what you needed to do in order to get to the stage where they would become relevant?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, we have, and this is what David talked about on the Airtable podcast that he did, which was we actually built out a CRM, not for our own business, but also for our investors. And so we built that in Airtable, and we were tracking information about, okay, what were the things that they said that they cared about? What were the key questions that they had for the business that were unanswered? And so then when we were having some of these follow-up conversations, we were able to speak directly to the things that they were concerned about previously. And that showed not only thoughtfulness, but also just progression of the business, especially in a short amount of time, that got that investment community fairly excited.
I mean, you're doing their diligence for them, right? So you're making their job easier, which again leads to the expedition of the whole process.
Well, at the end of the day, right, the best preparation you can do for a fundraising round is to have a solid business. And so we focused on having a solid business, answering a couple of key questions that we knew would come up based on what we learned in those previous conversations. And then when we had those questions answered, we went back to the market, or at least we're going to go back to the market, and just got preempted by a couple months.
So when we talk about the raise, I think 7.6 million seed round, which is obviously a big round in relative terms to other seed rounds. What you said 30 days. So what is that 30 days counting? What is the kind of day one and what is day 30?
Yeah. So again, we weren't officially fundraising for the seed round. It started with a preemptive offer. So from that first preemptive offer that came in to us actually, getting the first institutional check in that seed round was about 30 days. And you'll appreciate this. We were actually at the Startup Grind conference in February, which is, I think, the last time I actually was outside of Atlanta for anything social or work related, other than a couple trips to New York for the closing out this fundraising round. But basically we were just chatting with a variety of different investors, because we were out in the Bay. We were just letting them know what was happening in the business. And, one of them in particular said, hey, this looks like something I want to invest in. I know you're not raising money right now. You're planning on raising later this year, but I'd like to put in an offer. We got that offer a couple of days later. And from there, it was just off to the races because we already had all these other relationships with folks. And because we weren't prepared, I don't necessarily want to say it was an excuse to buy some time, but it was a good reason for us to say, hey, we need to think about whether this is the right time to raise and how much we should bring into the business given where we are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so given that it was coming from, it was almost it was inbound interest rather than, outbound interest or outbound generation. What mechanisms did you use to decide on that 7.6 million number? And how did you calibrate the sort of valuation and everything at that stage as well?
Yeah, so a lot of the things we were looking for in our pre-seed were still valid with our seed. And so we had a similar type of approach and process, which is like, what are the different things that we care about from an investor in this round? And number one was still their engagement and conviction on the business. And that's what ultimately led to Sigma to raise the round, was just we got incredible conviction about Francis there being able to help us move our business forward, not only from the perspective of capital, but also for ideas and how to operate the business and helping us, bring leaders into the business, which is kind of the second part of this. Is a little different than the pre-seed. Was we knew that we were going to have to start bringing in some leaders that didn't start with the business originally too. And we wanted to find folks who would help us do that as well. But then a lot of the other factors were the same. Like we still wanted a diversity of geographies and backgrounds for our different investors. And then also wanted the diverse perspective that comes with that. So all of those things put together helped us do, again, like a ranking of different funds, albeit in a much more hurried process the second time around. And then we said, okay, instead of starting at the middle or bottom of this list just to learn more about what we need, we'll start at the top. And so we just started at the top, made sure that we were having conversations with all the folks that we felt were most aligned with where we were going as a business and fit with our stage. And that helped the round come together fairly quickly. And you'd asked about the amount too, which is 7.6 million. Again, we try to avoid being overly specific. You know, if you're trying to trade tenths of a percent pretty early on in your business, that's might hamper you a good bit. Yeah, we weren't trying to build the perfect round. We were trying to build the round that could close, help us move our business forward, knowing that we were going to raise more money in the future again anyways. And so I think, you know, the 7.6 comes from us saying, okay, well, we want to raise, you know, at least $5 million. Like we want to at least, you know, get a 2.5x on the last round. But that also paired with what was happening in the world at the time, which was, you know, we were meeting with some firms. I'm not going to name names, but like there's some firms who were like, hey, we're not going to shake your hand when we meet you because of this COVID thing that's happening. And that told us, okay, well, we're not really certain what the effect that this is going to have on our business. So we should probably shy on the side of capitalizing a little bit more than we should, just in case there is some sort of lag in the investment market that will exist in the future. And so the timing worked out pretty well for us to raise just a little bit of extra capital early on. Fortunately, COVID hasn't had a significant impact on us operating our business. Everyone in the business has been safe and healthy. But I know others who have run into some significant struggles or roadblocks in their business as a result. And so I think it was the right decision at the time to say, hey, we're going to, you know, bump up this amount a little bit more, get some of the folks who otherwise wouldn't have fit in the round into the round as a result. And ultimately, we've been able to now deploy that capital fairly effectively. We've grown the team by 2x in 5 months, and we've also grown our customer base by about 5 or 6x in that same period of time.
Well, it's a busy year for you.
Yeah.
What? So just on the sort of COVID point, obviously there's a large element of, I guess, luck and serendipity in it as well. But how much what was it down to your planning and organization that you were able to kind of start and close that round really before things really started spiking across the world?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I'm Nostradamus over here. We did not have any clue as to what the impact of COVID would be when this process kicked off in late February. By the time we got to early March, we were thinking about it a lot. It was sort of like, hey, is this going to affect our, our raise? And we talked to the folks who were in sort of leading contention to run that round and said, hey, is this going to affect your decision to invest in our business? Because if so, maybe we should just throw on the brakes and we could go with our originally scheduled plan of raising later on in 2020. And all of them said, no, because we know if we're not giving you money now, someone else is. And we think you're going to be able to weather this shock that's happening in the global economy fairly well because of your position as a horizontal business.
Okay. And so now we're obviously coming towards the end of 2020 already, which I can't believe. You guys have 5x your customer base, and you're growing well. What is the planning for your A raise looking like? How is the experience that you had on pre-seed and seed feeding into your preparation for that?
Yeah, so it all goes back to again, what are the key things that we need to do in the business? And so as anyone who's been in this position before knows, you will get lots of interest from investors, and we will happily have conversations with them, but it's not going to be regular because we need to focus on proving out some of the key points that we need to over the next few months here. The other side of it too is we want to make sure that we can make the most effective use of all the capital that comes into the business. When we raised the 2.1 million, we knew that we could effectively deploy that capital. When we raised the 7.6 million, we knew that we could effectively deploy that capital over the following period. We need to gain a degree of conviction about how and where best to deploy capital that we bring in from an investor the next time we raise too. And so those are the things that we're going through as a business right now is, hey, we have a few other things that we need to prove to ourselves before we go and try to prove those things to the investor community. And usually what that means is like, if you can prove it to yourself, it's not going to be too difficult to go to an investor and say, hey, here's the evidence that I used to convince myself that it's time for me to sell part of this business that otherwise I could probably, sit on and turn around into a profitable business if I really wanted to. And those are the types of things that get investors really excited, is the fact that, hey, you're focusing on proving your ability to move to market as a business. You're proving the fit of your product. You're able to, close customers at a faster rate or larger customers over time and operate your business more and more efficiently. Doing all those things turn into a fundraising round, right? So it's not the other way around where you take a fundraising round and then you say like, oh, hey, I could do this and I could do this with the capital. You're going to say, I'm going to do more of this and more of this and more of this with that capital.
Yeah, I think that's a better outlook. And it certainly sounds like, you've had a pretty fast-tracked first couple of years at Flatfile and a very interesting time ahead. So I think a lot of the people who watch this will be tracking Flatfile. And we're also going to put together a blog post as well, summarizing some of this stuff here, because I'm sure there'll be snippets of this that people will want to kind of reflect on and kind of dive deeper into. So looking forward to pulling that together with you as well, Eric. So just to kind of summarize things, this may be a difficult question to ask, but are there sort of 3 words that you can leave us with that will sort of imprint on people who are watching this back, how to kind of best design a fundraise to optimize for speed?
Sure, but it's going to be a sentence.
That's fine.
It's operate your business. That's it. I mean, like, if you know your business really well and you understand what makes it move and you understand the places where you're struggling to make it move, that's really most of what you need. Because when you get these questions from investors, and especially as you move further and further along in different investment rounds, they're going to want to know things that, you aren't necessarily thinking about if you're overly focused on the fundraise. If you are knee deep in your business saying, hey, I need to figure out exactly what's going wrong here. I need to figure out how to improve things and iterate over time. All that information will come incredibly naturally to you, but also that effort and time you put into the business is really going to help when you have those investor conversations. And I'll tell you, I mean, everyone knows this, right? It's kind of an unwritten rule, but if you say, sorry, investor, I can't talk right now, I'm too busy selling customers on my solution, that's not going to hurt you in an investment conversation. That just means that, hey, okay, we need to have this at another time, but they're going to be excited about the fact that you are so dedicated to your business that you want to fund it with customer dollars first rather than investor dollars. I mean, customer dollars are a lot cheaper than investor dollars anyways. So I don't know if I'm going to either take a call with a Fortune 500 type business who's really interested in potentially signing our biggest contract ever, or a call with an investor just to catch up with them about the state of the business. I'm going to take that customer call 100% of the time and ask the investor to work around that customer conversation.
Love that. Well, that's a call to all prospective customers out there to message Eric if they're interested in working with Flatfile.
Yeah, and also other founders too. I mean, so both myself and David are totally open with this kind of stuff. If you want to reach out, feel free to email me or David, add us on LinkedIn. More than happy to talk with you about fundraising. If you're interested in Flatfile as a solution for your business, more than happy to talk through that with you. We're still at the stage now where we're capable of giving founder attention to almost every business who signs up and uses Flatfile, which is really exciting for us. I just love being able to work with our customers still. And I don't think there's going to be a day in the history of Flatfile where I'm not having some type of active conversation with a customer of ours.
Yeah, I mean, they're the best conversations, right? In a way, you came to our conference, you're on our program. These kind of conversations, I learn a lot from them, and I have a lot of fun as well. So they're definitely the best kind of conversations to have. And I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you today, Eric. So thanks so much for your time.
All right, thanks, Alex, and you stay well.
Thanks, man. Bye.